Since the dawn of civilization, humanity has struggled with the ubiquitous and often overwhelming presence of suffering. It manifests itself in countless ways. The physical pain that plagues us, the loss of loved ones that tears us apart, the frustration of broken dreams, the existential anguish that sometimes assails us in the silence of the night. Viktor Frankl, a man who experienced the hell of the Nazi concentration camps, was under no illusions about this reality. For him, suffering is not an anomaly, a mistake to be avoided at all costs, but rather an intrinsic component of the human condition. It is an undeniable truth that applies to everyone, regardless of social status, beliefs, or aspirations. Frankl not only recognized this inevitability, but used it as a starting point for one of the most powerful and liberating ideas of his logotherapy. He understood that, if suffering is a constant, the way we deal with it is our most precious variable. In the extermination camps, where all other freedoms were systematically stolen, freedom of movement, freedom of expression, freedom of choice of food, freedom of hygiene, basic dignity, there remained only one final and inalienable freedom: the freedom to choose one's own attitude toward circumstances. Think for a moment about the most desolate scenario imaginable: hunger, bitter cold, wanton violence, the loss of family and friends, the constant threat of death, brutal dehumanization. In the midst of this abyss of despair, some prisoners would succumb completely, giving in to despair, apathy, or animalism. Others, however, through an act of sheer will and inner defiance, chose to respond differently. They might decide to share their last piece of bread, console a fellow prisoner, maintain a macabre sense of humor in order to survive sanity, or even pray and reflect on the beauty of nature that they saw through the cracks in the barracks. This choice did not eliminate the physical pain or terror, but it did transform the meaning of the experience. The suffering was still there, but the way it was experienced and endured changed radically. This is the essence of what Frankl called the last of the human freedoms: the ability to choose our attitude in the face of any given set of circumstances. We are not mere products of our genes or our environment. We are, above all, beings capable of self-determination. Suffering, then, is not an end in itself, but a challenge to our inner freedom. It invites us or forces us to look within, to discover reserves of strength, resilience, and purpose that we may not have known we possessed. It is at this point that suffering, from an unbearable burden, can become a doorway to a new understanding of ourselves, the world, and what really matters in life. It is not that we should seek out suffering, or that it is desirable. Far from it. But when it imposes itself, and there is no way to avoid it or change it, the responsibility and the power to find meaning in how we approach it falls squarely on us. This is the key to transforming an inevitable tragedy into a triumph of the will. Human spirit. After understanding that suffering is an undeniable reality, and that our freedom lies in choosing our attitude towards it, the next crucial question that arises is, how, after all, can we find meaning in something so inherently painful? Viktor Frankl was categorical. Suffering in and of itself has no meaning. It is not an experience that is given to us with a predefined purpose, as if it were a divine punishment or an automatic lesson. In logotherapy, meaning is not something to be discovered in the suffering itself, but something that the individual must attribute to it. This distinction is crucial. It is an active perspective, not a passive one. It means that when we are faced with pain that cannot be avoided, an incurable illness, an irreparable loss, an injustice that cannot be righted, we should not wait for the suffering to reveal its purpose to us. Rather, it is we who have the responsibility and the power to imbue that suffering with meaning. Imagine a person who has lost a limb in an accident. The physical and emotional pain is overwhelming, and the change in their life is drastic and irreversible. Frankl would tell us that this person has a profound choice. They can succumb to despair, self-pity, and feelings of victimization, seeing their life as permanently ruined. Or they can ask themselves, what can I do with this new reality? What kind of person will I be from now on? How can I use this experience to help others, to develop new strengths, or to appreciate life in a way I didn't before? In this scenario, meaning can emerge in several ways. Self-improvement. Suffering can force us to develop qualities such as patience, resilience, compassion, and humility. It is in the furnace of adversity that many virtues are forged. Helping others. Many people who have experienced great suffering find meaning in dedicating themselves to supporting others in similar situations, transforming their pain into a beacon of hope and solidarity. Reaffirmation of values. Pain can strip us of superficialities, revealing what is truly important in our lives. It can lead us to reevaluate priorities and live more authentically and in alignment with our deepest values. Testimony. Sometimes the simple act of enduring unavoidable suffering with dignity and courage, without giving in, serves as a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit to those around us. The central premise is that even when life takes everything from us, it cannot take away our freedom to choose how to respond. If we cannot change the circumstance that causes us pain, we can and must, according to Frankl, change ourselves, our attitude, and our perspective toward it. This internal change is the gateway to finding meaning, to transforming a tragedy into a human achievement. It is an invitation to courage, responsibility, and deep self-reflection. Meaning is not something that is found passively, like a lost object. It is something that is actively constructed, even and especially in the most adverse conditions of existence. Up to this point, we have explored the inevitability of suffering and our ability to find meaning in it. Now Frankl invites us to understand what really drives us as human beings. For him, the prevailing psychological theories of his time, Freudian psychoanalysis, which focused on the will to pleasure, and Adler's individual psychology, which emphasized the will to power, captured only parts of the complex human motivation. Frankl, with his profound insight and life experience, proposed an even more fundamental driving force: the will to meaning. Think about your own life. In moments of great joy or deep contentment, are you simply seeking pleasure? And in moments of challenge, when you are striving for a promotion, an ideal, or recognition, are you simply seeking power? Frankl would argue that underlying many of these pursuits is a deeper restlessness, an innate need to find purpose, meaning in one's existence. The will to meaning is this primal search for a why. It is the human aspiration that life is not merely a succession of random events, but that it has value, a reason for being. It is what drives us to ask, what is the meaning of my life? What is my purpose here? What contribution can I make? This need is not an existential luxury that arises only in times of leisure. On the contrary, Frankl observed that it becomes even more poignant and vital in situations of extreme suffering and deprivation. In the concentration camps, where pleasure was non-existent and power was exercised only by the oppressors, the will to meaning manifested itself in striking ways. People who had lost everything, their families, their possessions, their freedom, and even their names, clung to small glimpses of meaning: the memory of a loved one, the promise of reuniting with a loved one, the completion of an important work in their mind, mutual aid among prisoners, or even watching a sunset. These were the tenuous threads that connected them to life and gave them the strength to endure the unbearable. Frankl not only postulated this will, but also argued that its frustration leads to neurogenic neurosis, a type of existential neurosis characterized by feelings of emptiness, purposelessness, and despair. In a society that often privileges hedonism and material success, the will to meaning can be neglected, resulting in an existential gap where the individual feels lost and directionless, even though all of his or her basic needs are met. The will to meaning is therefore the fundamental driving force that drives us to seek and realize purpose. It is what allows us not only to survive suffering, but also to find a reason to live and thrive, transforming even the darkest experiences into opportunities for deeper meaning. So far, we have seen that suffering is inevitable, that we can make sense of it, and that the will to meaning is our primary driving force. Now, Viktor Frankl introduces us to a concept that is essential for understanding how suffering can, paradoxically, elevate us: self-transcendence. For Frankl, human beings are not closed in on themselves, self-centered, and focused only on their own needs and pleasures. We are, by nature, beings who tend to go beyond ourselves. Self-transcendence is precisely this innate capacity to extend beyond the ego, to turn to something or someone other than ourselves. It is our ability to dedicate ourselves to a cause greater than ourselves, to love another person deeply, to create a work of art, to serve a community, or to pursue an ideal. This is where pain and suffering can become a powerful vehicle for self-transcendence. When we are struck by great adversity, a devastating loss, or a limiting illness, we are forced to confront our own vulnerability and finitude. Rather than retreating into our pain and selfishness, suffering can propel us into a new dimension of existence where we connect with something greater. Consider someone who is going through a serious illness. The physical pain and fear can be overwhelming. Yet many people in this situation find surprising strength in thinking about their loved ones, the importance of fighting for their lives to be with them, or dedicating themselves to inspiring others who are facing similar struggles. This dedication to something outside of oneself, whether it's family, a cause, or one's own ability to inspire, is an act of self-transcendence. Frankl observed that in concentration camps, the prisoners who managed to survive with a modicum of dignity were often those who clung to a self-transcendent vision, the desire to see their family again, the hope of bearing witness to the horrors of the outside world, or even compassion for a weaker comrade. They transcended their own basic needs and their own pain by dedicating themselves to something or someone other than themselves. Pain takes us out of our comfort zone and confronts us with the harshness of existence. But it is precisely in this confrontation that we can discover the capacity to go beyond our own limits, to find a purpose that lifts us above suffering. By focusing on something or someone outside of ourselves, suffering, which once seemed like a dead end, can open up into a new landscape of meaning and fulfillment. It is an invitation to look outward and upward, rather than wallowing in our own pain. Self-transcendence thus transforms the experience of suffering into a path to a fuller and more meaningful life. Having explored the inevitability of suffering, the attribution of meaning to it, the will to meaning as our driving force, and self-transcendence, it is only natural that we arrive at one of Viktor Frankl's most inspiring conclusions. Suffering, paradoxically, can be a potent catalyst for psychological and spiritual growth. It is not just an experience to be endured, but a fertile field in which the human soul can grow stronger and expand. In our contemporary culture, there is a strong tendency to avoid suffering at all costs. We seek pleasure, comfort, and the absence of pain as our primary goals. However, Frankl invites us to take a different perspective. That suffering, especially that which cannot be avoided, offers us a unique opportunity to reveal and develop dimensions of ourselves that would remain dormant in times of prosperity. Think of a precious metal that must pass through fire to be purified and hardened, or of a seed that must break through its shell and struggle against the earth to sprout. In the same way, suffering confronts us with our deepest vulnerabilities, strips us of superficialities, and forces us to look within. It is in this confrontation that resilience emerges. We are not born with it fully developed. It is forged in overcoming adversity. What are the aspects of inner growth that suffering can promote? Deeper self-awareness. In times of crisis, we are forced to test our limits, question our beliefs, and reevaluate what is truly important. This leads us to deeper self-awareness, revealing previously unknown strengths and weaknesses, building resilience. The ability to bounce back from setbacks and adapt to adverse changes is not innate. It is built through the experience of overcoming obstacles, of falling and getting up again. Every scar can be proof that we are stronger than we imagined. Developing empathy and compassion. The experience of pain can make us more sensitive to the suffering of others. Having walked through dark valleys, we are better able to reach out to others who are on their own journey of grief. Developing deep empathy and compassion. Reaffirmation of values and priorities. In the face of loss or threat, trivial things tend to lose their importance. Suffering forces us to focus on the essential, to discern what really matters in life, and to live in a way that is more aligned with our deepest values. Family, friendship, health, freedom. Often, we only realize their true value when we are at risk of losing them. Opening to new perspectives. Pain can break paradigms and force us to see the world in a new light. What once seemed like a disaster can turn out to be an opportunity for a new path, a new passion, or a new way of contributing. Frankl did not propose that we seek out suffering, but that when it finds us, we embrace it as an opportunity for transformation. It is not about liking pain, but about the ability to use it as a lever for our own improvement. It is in the crucible of adversity that character is shaped, wisdom is acquired, and the human spirit rises to new heights. So far, we have discussed the inevitability of suffering, the ability to make sense of it, the driving force of the will to meaning, and how pain can lead to self-transcendence and inner growth. Now, Viktor Frankl introduces us to one of the most empowering concepts in his philosophy, the attitude of defiance toward fate. In a world where we often feel hostage to circumstances, adversities, and fates, Frankl insists that we are not merely passive victims. Even when faced with what he called the tragic triad, suffering, guilt, and death, human beings have an inalienable capacity to assume an active stance, an attitude of defiance. This does not mean denying the pain or the reality of the situation, but rather refusing to be defined or crushed by it. Think back to the concentration camps. Thousands succumbed to despair, apathy, violence, or surrender. But Frankl observed that some, even in the most inhumane conditions, retained a spark of inner resilience. They may have had no control over their starving bodies or the terror around them, but they exercised supreme control over their inner response. They defied fate not with physical strength, but with strength of spirit. This challenging attitude manifests itself in maintaining dignity, even when human dignity was systematically stripped away. Some prisoners refused to give it up. Small acts of personal hygiene, sharing, philosophical conversations, or standing up straight were ways of defying the imposed dehumanization, searching for meaning despite everything. When fate imposes suffering that cannot be changed, the attitude of defiance translates into the tireless search for a why. Why am I going through this? What lesson can I learn? What purpose can I give to this experience? This active search for meaning is an act of rebellion against the lack of purpose that pain may try to impose, turning in spite of into because of. Frankl argued that human beings have the capacity to transcend conditions. Instead of saying, "I gave up because of what happened to me," the attitude of defiance allows us to say, "I became stronger in spite of what happened to me," or even more profoundly, "I found new purpose because of what happened to me." Taking responsibility for your own life. Being responsible is not just about what we do, but also about how we respond to what happens to us. The attitude of defiance is a recognition that even when we are powerless to change external circumstances, we are powerful to change our internal attitude towards them. This attitude of defiance is an act of existential courage. It is the affirmation that no matter how dark the situation, the flame of inner freedom, the freedom to choose how to respond, can never be extinguished unless we ourselves extinguish it. It is the unshakable belief that life has the potential for meaning in every circumstance, even the most tragic, and that it is up to us, and us alone, to discover and realize that meaning. We have already understood the inevitability of suffering, our freedom of attitude in the face of it, the profound will to meaning that drives us, the self-transcendence that pain can provide, the inner growth that can arise from it, and the crucial attitude of defiance. Now Frankl invites us to take a step further, culminating in the idea that the experience of tragedy, however devastating, need not be the end of the line. On the contrary, it can be the starting point for a genuinely human achievement. This idea is, at first glance, counterintuitive. How can something as painful and destructive as a tragedy, the loss of a child, an incurable disease, a brutal injustice be transformed into an achievement? Frankl does not propose a naive or superficial view of pain. He does not say that tragedy is good in itself, but that human beings have the unique capacity to extract something of inestimable value from it. For Frankl, achievement is not in avoiding tragedy or pretending it didn't happen. It's in how we respond to it and what we allow it to do or not do to us. It's how the individual, faced with inevitable and unchangeable suffering, rises above the circumstances, exercising his or her freedom of action and finding meaning. This is the essence of triumphant tragedy, not because tragedy is glorious, but because the human spirit that endures, it emerges stronger, wiser, and somehow more complete. Let's consider some examples of how tragedy can be transmuted. Courage and dignified standing. The way a person deals with immense pain can become a source of inspiration to others. Dignity maintained in the midst of humiliation, courage displayed in the face of fear, calm acceptance of imminent death. All these can be achievements in themselves, a silent testament to the strength of the human spirit. Legacy and transforming. Grief into purpose. Often the greatest achievement from a tragedy is the decision to transform grief into meaningful purpose. People who have lost loved ones to accidents or illness may become activists, start charities, or dedicate their lives to preventing others from experiencing the same pain. Loss becomes the driving force for greater contribution, the renewal of values and the depth of life. A tragedy can strip life of its superficialities, revealing what is truly essential. Human relationships, appreciation for the small moments, the beauty of nature, the very capacity to feel. All can be seen with new and profound gratitude. This reorientation of values is an achievement of a more authentic and meaningful life, resilience and acquired wisdom. Surviving a tragedy while leaving scars can confer wisdom and resilience unattainable by other means. One becomes stronger, more understanding, and better able to deal with future challenges, knowing that one has faced the unthinkable and emerged. Frankl did not suggest that suffering is a desirable path, but that it is a human reality. And when that reality presents itself in a tragic and inevitable way, we have the ability and the responsibility to transform it, not into something good in the hedonistic sense, but into something meaningful, something that reveals the greatness of the human spirit. It is in the arena of pain that the last of human freedoms, the freedom to choose one's own attitude, is most profoundly exercised, leading to the most profound of achievements, finding meaning and maintaining dignity even in the face of the abyss. We have already covered the paths of the inevitability of suffering, our freedom of action, the will to meaning, self-transcendence, inner growth. and the transformation of tragedy into achievement. Now, Viktor Frankl offers us a crucial mental strategy for navigating pain: the ability to alter our perspective and create psychological distance from suffering. Often, the intensity of our pain is amplified by our proximity to it. It's like being glued to a painting. All you see are blurs and disconnected brushstrokes. To appreciate the work of art, you have to step back and gain a new perspective. The same is true of suffering. When we're immersed in it, it can feel all-encompassing, overwhelming, and without escape. Our vision becomes blurred, and our ability to make sense of it is obscured. Frankl observed that even in concentration camps, some prisoners somehow managed to rise above their immediate circumstances. They did not deny the brutal reality, but were able to see it from a different point of view. This was not an escape from reality, but a way of mentally transcending it. How does this psychological distance manifest itself? Looking at pain as an observer, instead of completely identifying with the pain. I am my pain. The person can try to observe it as if they were seeing it from the outside. This allows the person to recognize that the pain is a part of the experience, but not the whole of the being. This healthy dissociation can reduce the intensity of suffering. The spiritual and existential dimension Frankl often spoke of. A spiritual or nological dimension, from the Greek nous, spirit, which is unattainable by physical or psychological suffering. By connecting with this higher dimension, whether through faith, reflection on life's purpose, or the memory of values and loves, one gains distance from the limitations imposed by pain. Humor as a tool. One of Frankl's most surprising insights was the role of humor in the concentration camps. Telling macabre jokes or laughing at grotesque situations was not a disrespect to the gravity of the moment, but a way of rising above misery, of asserting an inner freedom from degradation. Humor creates a distance between the self and the oppressive circumstance, the as if and the vision of the future. Frankl suggested that people, even in the most dire circumstances, imagine themselves in a future, telling their story. This projection into the future creates a temporal distance from the present suffering, transforming the current experience into a chapter to be overcome, a story to be told. As if I were looking at this 5 years from now, what would I learn? What would make sense? The consciousness of the uniqueness of life, by recognizing that each moment is unique and unrepeatable, and that life expects something from us. Instead of us expecting something from life, our perspective changes. Suffering becomes a challenge to be overcome and integrated into the story of a meaningful life. Psychological distance is not about apathy or indifference. It is about the ability to stand above suffering, not to deny it, but to see beyond it. It is a powerful tool for preventing pain from consuming us completely, allowing the light of meaning to continue to shine, even in the darkest hours. It is the affirmation that the human mind is capable of building an inner refuge, a space of freedom where the spirit can endure and find its purpose, regardless of external pressures. The journey through suffering, in Viktor Frankl's view, is often a path of discovery. And the 9th topic we explore points to one of its most profound insights: suffering as a revealer of values. In times of great adversity and pain, when we are stripped of material comforts, social status, or even physical health, what truly matters in our lives emerges with crystal clarity. Think about your daily life. We are often immersed in a routine that leads us to pursue goals that, although they may seem important at the time, may be superficial. The search for material goods, for social recognition, for a certain level of comfort, all of this can distract us from what is essential. It is when tragedy knocks on the door, when pain becomes a constant companion, that the masks fall and we are confronted with the naked truth of our existence. Frankl observed in the concentration camps that while some prisoners became more brutal and selfish in order to survive, others, in the face of extreme deprivation and unbearable suffering, revealed a depth of character and a fidelity to values that had perhaps previously been dormant. In an environment where life was worth little and each day could be the last, the things that truly gave meaning to existence became evident. The value of human relations. In the midst of dehumanization, the ability to offer a word of comfort, to share a piece of bread, to simply look with recognition between fellow sufferers took on immeasurable value. Human connections, loyalty, and compassion were revealed as fundamental pillars of existence. The importance of inner freedom, even when physical freedom was completely suppressed. The freedom to decide how to respond to the situation, to maintain one's dignity and integrity, was the supreme value. It was proof that the human spirit could transcend physical chains. The beauty of life. In moments of darkness, the memory of a sunset, the sight of a bird, the memory of a melody or a poem could be the only source of solace. The value of beauty and art, which is often neglected in the rush of everyday life, emerged as a refuge and a source of meaning, purpose, and responsibility. For many, suffering heightened the need to find purpose. Whether it was the hope of reuniting with family, finishing worthwhile work, or bearing witness to horrors so they would never happen again, life gained renewed meaning through responsibility for something or someone other than oneself. Suffering, then, acts as a kind of existential filter. It purifies our perception, eliminating the trivial and leaving us with only the essential. By being stripped of everything else, we are forced to confront what we truly value, what gives us the strength to carry on, and what is worth living and even dying for. It is a brutal but profoundly liberating revelation that allows us to live a more authentic life aligned with our deepest values. We have reached the 10th and final topic of this exploration of suffering from Viktor Frankl's perspective, the responsibility to find one's own meaning. This is the culmination of his philosophy, a conclusion that ties together all the previous concepts and places in the hands of each individual the ultimate power over his or her existence. Throughout our discussion, we have seen that suffering is an inevitable part of life, but that our attitude toward it is an inalienable freedom. We have discovered the will to meaning as our primary driving force. Self-transcendence is a path to elevation. Suffering is a catalyst for growth and a revealer of values, and the attitude of challenge and the importance of perspective. Now, Frankl tells us that although life presents us with challenges and opportunities, the task of discovering and realizing meaning in each of them is our responsibility alone. Meaning is not something that is handed to us on a platter. There is no universal, prefabricated meaning of life that applies to everyone. Meaning is unique and specific to each individual, to each moment, to each situation. It cannot be given by a guru, by a book, or by a philosophy of life. It needs to be discovered and realized through our choices and actions. Think about it. In a situation of suffering, no one can tell you the meaning of your pain is X. This is an intimate, personal, and non-transferable quest. Life, with its joys and tragedies, is constantly asking us, what is your response? What will you do with this situation? What meaning will you give it? The responsibility lies in providing that response. Frankl emphasized that life does not ask, what do you expect from life? But rather, what does life expect from you? This shift in perspective is crucial. It moves us from a passive stance of waiting to an active stance of agency and responsibility. At every moment, we are called to respond to life's demands, and it is in this response that we find our meaning. This responsibility manifests itself in many ways, especially in the face of suffering. Acceptance of the call. Pain can be a call to action, to change, to compassion. The responsibility is to hear that call and act accordingly, finding purpose in adversity. Creative action. In many cases, meaning can be found in creating something new out of suffering, a work of art, a new project, a new way of living. Experiential living. Meaning can be found in the fullness of an experience, the love for someone, the beauty of nature, the depth of a moment. Even in the midst of pain, the ability to appreciate and experience intensely is a responsible choice. Attitude in the face of the inevitable. When suffering is inescapable, the responsibility for finding meaning lies in the attitude with which one endures that pain. Maintaining dignity, courage, integrity. This is the most profound way to make meaning in the most dire circumstances. In short, Frankl's final message is a powerful affirmation of human freedom and dignity. Even when all other freedoms are taken away, the ultimate freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude toward fate, remains. And with this freedom comes the responsibility to find one's own meaning, to become the architect of one's own existence, to transform every experience, including suffering, into a meaningful link in the chain of a fulfilling life.